The champagne was still cold in her hand when her husband announced to 200 guests that their marriage was a mistake. She was 7 months pregnant. Security guards dragged her through the ballroom, while his mistress smiled in the corner.
Yes,
His mother
I've reviewed
applauded.
the contracts.
200
we can move forward with the
so-called
acquisition,
friends
but I
watched
want the
in
liability
silence.
clause
They
adjusted
threw her
before
into the
signing.
rain with nothing.
The funds were moved
no
through this
money,
shell
no
corporation
home,
right here.
no family
We have enough
willing
evidence
to
now
answer
to
her
move forward
calls.
with the injunction.
They thought they had destroyed her.
The
They
court
thought a
finds the
pregnant woman
defendant,
alone in the
Marcus
world would
Ashford,
simply disappear.
liable for the charges.
They had no idea
Therefore,
that the woman they
judgment is
threw
entered
away
in favor of the
like
plaintiff.
garbage was
I
secretly
missed you
the
so
heir to an
much,
$80
baby.
million fortune. And they had no idea that the revenge brewing in her heart would burn their empire to ashes. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about a woman who lost everything in a single night and spent the next 2 years becoming someone her enemies never saw coming. A woman who turned her pain into power, her suffering into strategy, her tears into triumph. What you are about to hear will make you angry. It will break your heart. And then it will show you what happens when you underestimate a mother protecting her child. Stay with me until the end. Because the twist in this story, you will never see it coming. Now let us begin. Value statement and lesson. Before we dive in, I want you to know something important. This story carries a powerful message for anyone who has ever been thrown away, told they were worthless, or made to feel like they did not matter. The lesson is simple, but life-changing. Being discarded by people who should have loved you does not define your worth. It reveals theirs. And sometimes, losing everything is exactly what you need to find out who you really are. If you have ever felt broken, this story is for you. The champagne was still cold in my hand when my husband announced to 200 guests that our marriage was a mistake. I was 7 months pregnant, and I had no idea that the woman smiling in the corner would take everything from me, or that losing everything would be the beginning of finding out who I really was. My name is Carolina Bennett. Most people called me Carrie. For 4 years, I had been Carolina Ashford, wife of Marcus Ashford, daughter-in-law of the formidable Vivian Ashford, member of one of the oldest and wealthiest families in the city. I had traded my maiden name for a designer wardrobe, a mansion I never felt at home in, and a husband who looked through me like I was made of glass. The chandeliers in the Ashford ballroom burned like 1,000 accusations that night, their golden light spilling across marble floors so polished they reflected every secret buried in that house. I stood at the edge of the room, one hand resting on my swollen belly, feeling my daughter kick against my palm. She had been active all evening, restless, as if she sensed something I could not yet see. I wore a silk gown the color of champagne, chosen carefully, to hide how my hands trembled, how my ankles had swollen to twice their normal size, how exhausted I was from planning this entire event while 7 months pregnant. The Ashford Foundation annual benefit was my masterpiece. I had spent 3 months coordinating every detail, the flower arrangements imported from Holland, the string quartet flown in from Vienna, the menu approved by a Michelin-starred chef, every napkin fold, every place card, every carefully worded invitation had passed through my hands, and I had no idea it would become my public execution. Mrs. Patterson cornered me near the ice sculpture, a 12-foot replica of the Ashford family crest that was already beginning to melt. She was 73 years old, worth approximately $80 million, and utterly insufferable. "The help these days," she sighed, swirling her champagne. "You simply cannot find good people anymore. My housekeeper in Aspen quit last week. Can you imagine? Right before ski season. Now I have to interview replacements while managing the Palm Beach property and the vineyard in Napa. It is exhausting." I nodded sympathetically, the way I had learned to nod at these events. My feet were screaming in protest, my lower back ached with a dull, persistent throb, and my daughter was performing what felt like gymnastics against my ribs. But Carolina Ashford did not complain. Carolina Ashford smiled and nodded and made wealthy women feel heard. "That must be so difficult," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Across the ballroom, I spotted my husband. Marcus Ashford was 42 years old, tall and lean, with dark hair silvering at the temples in a way that made women call him distinguished. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, his suits were always perfectly tailored, and his eyes could charm or freeze, depending on his mood. Tonight they were cold. He stood in the center of a circle of admirers, businessmen, and socialites who hung on his every word like he was dispensing wisdom from Mount Olympus. I watched him laugh at something one of the men said, his head thrown back, his teeth perfectly white. He looked happy, relaxed. Nothing like the man who had barely spoken to me in weeks, who slept in the guest room more often than our bed, who flinched when I tried to touch him. Something was wrong. I had felt it for months, a distance growing between us that I could not bridge, no matter how hard I tried. I had blamed the pregnancy at first. Marcus had always been clear that he wanted children, but perhaps the reality was different from the expectation. Perhaps watching my body change, watching me become slower and more tired, had reminded him that I was not the woman he had married. But tonight felt different. The wrongness was sharper, more immediate. Like the moment before lightning strikes, when the air goes thick and electric and every instinct screams to take cover. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. Unknown number with a local area code. Probably a vendor with a last-minute question about the event. I silenced it and slipped the phone back into my bag. That was my first mistake, but I noticed his mother watching me from across the room. Vivian Ashford was 64 years old, with silver hair, perfectly coiffed, a designer dress that cost more than most people earned in a year, and eyes like a hawk, circling prey. She had never liked me. I was not old money, not connected to the right families, not raised in the proper circles. I was an event planner from a middle-class family in Ohio who had somehow caught her son's attention at a charity gala 5 years ago. She had spent 4 years making sure I knew I did not belong. "You look tired, dear," she had said to me earlier that evening, her smile sharp as a blade. Pregnancy is hard on some women. Others seem to glow. I suppose we cannot all be lucky. I had smiled and nodded and pretended not to notice the insult buried in her words. That was what I did. That was what I had always done. Smile, nod, pretend. Keep the peace. Be the perfect wife. Do not make waves. Look how well that had worked out. Marcus raised his champagne glass, and the room fell silent with a kind of reverence usually reserved for kings and prophets. My stomach tightened with a feeling I could not name. I knew that look on his face, that cold determination, the set of his jaw that meant he had made a decision and nothing would change his mind. I had seen that look when he decided to buy a company his advisors told him was failing, when he fired his CFO despite 20 years of loyalty, when he ended friendships with men who had known him since prep school. It was the look of a man who had already moved on from whatever was about to happen next. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice cut through the silence like a blade, smooth and commanding, the kind of voice that made people stop breathing just to hear what came next. "I have something important to share tonight, something that needs to be addressed publicly." I felt my daughter kick, hard, pressing against my ribs like she was trying to get my attention. Around me, guests shifted, curiosity peaked. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Vivian glided forward, positioning herself beside Marcus like a general, standing beside her commander. Her smile could have drawn blood. My heart began to pound. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. "My marriage to Carolina," Marcus said, And the way he spoke my name made my knees weak. He said it like it tasted bitter on his tongue. Like I was a problem he had finally found the courage to solve. Was a mistake. The words detonated like a bomb in the silent room. I heard gasps, sharp intakes of breath, the rustle of expensive fabric, as 200 people turned to stare at me. The floor tilted beneath my feet. My vision blurred at the edges. This was not happening. This could not be happening. She has failed me, Marcus continued, his voice rising with a conviction that sounded rehearsed. Failed me as a wife, failed me as the mother of my heir. Each word was a knife driven deeper into my chest. But what shattered me completely was the way he said it, not with anger or regret or even cruelty, with cold clinical detachment, like I was a business deal that had not worked out, like I was a stock that had underperformed, like I was nothing. How does a man stand in front of 200 people and call his pregnant wife a mistake? How does he look at the woman carrying his child and decide she is worthless? The room erupted in whispers, but beneath the shock was something uglier. Agreement. I saw it in their faces, the subtle nods, the pursed lips, the knowing glances exchanged between women who had never liked me and men who followed wherever Marcus led. In their world, a wife's value was measured by the son she produced, and I was carrying a daughter. In their eyes, I had failed before my child was even born. Vivian began to clap, slow and deliberate, each strike of her palms like a judge's gavel sealing a verdict. Finally, she announced, her voice projecting across the ballroom so everyone could hear. The woman who could not give us a son is exposed for what she truly is, worthless. The word hung in the air like poison. My hands instinctively tightened around my belly, as if I could shield my daughter from the cruelty, from the hate radiating from the woman who should have been her grandmother. I learned something that night that I wish someone had told me years ago. When someone shows you who they are in private, believe them. Do not wait for them to prove it in public. Marcus had been showing me for years, the canceled dinners, the forgotten anniversaries, the way he talked about our future without ever including me in his plans. I just had not wanted to see it. Security, Marcus said, and the single word carried the finality of an execution order. 2 men in black suits materialized from the edges of the room, moving toward me with practiced efficiency. Their faces were blank, emotionless. They did not see a pregnant woman. They saw a task to complete. I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, searching for any trace of the man I had married. The man who had told me I was beautiful on our wedding day. The man who had held my hand when I miscarried our first pregnancy 2 years ago. The man who had promised me forever. His eyes were empty, already looking past me, already planning whatever future he had decided I had no place in. Marcus, please, I whispered, my voice cracking on his name. He turned away, just turned away, like I had already ceased to exist. The security guards reached me, their hands closing around my arms with firm, impersonal grips. I stumbled, my pregnant body awkward and heavy, my silk heels catching on the marble floor. Around me, 200 people watched in silence. Friends I had known for years suddenly found the floor fascinating. Women I had shared laughter with at book clubs and charity lunches turned their backs. Men who had shaken my hand at cocktail parties now avoided my eyes like I was contagious. No one helped me. No one said a word. They walked me through the ballroom, past tables laden with champagne and caviar, past the ice sculpture that was melting just like my life, past the orchestra that had stopped playing. The grand foyer stretched before me like a gauntlet, its crystal chandeliers mocking me with their brilliance. But as they pushed me toward the door, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A beautiful young woman stepped forward from the shadows, taking Marcus's arm with the ease of someone who had done it many times before. She was perhaps 29, with the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers. Blonde hair cascading over bare shoulders, a red dress that clung to curves I no longer had, a smile that said she had won and she knew it, and she was pregnant, about 4 months along, if I had to guess. "I would like you all to meet Destiny Blake," Marcus announced, his voice warm now, the coldness reserved only for me, the future Mrs. Ashford. The applause started somewhere in the back of the room and spread like wildfire. The doors slammed shut behind me, and the rain hit like a physical blow, cold and relentless and completely indifferent to my devastation. I stood on the steps of the Ashford estate, shivering in my ruined gown, watching through the rain-streaked windows as my husband introduced his pregnant mistress to all the people who used to pretend to be my friends. I watched them raise their glasses. I watched them smile. I watched my entire life burn to the ground in a single evening. The rain continued to fall, soaking through my silk dress, plastering my hair to my face, washing away the makeup I had spent an hour applying. Somewhere between the ballroom and the steps, I had lost my heels. My bare feet were numb against the cold stone, but beneath the shock and the humiliation and the crushing weight of betrayal, something else was stirring, something quiet, something that felt like the first spark of a fire that would not be easily extinguished. They thought they had won. They thought I had nothing left. They thought throwing me away meant I would stay gone. They had no idea how wrong they were. The rain did not stop. It fell in sheets, turning the city streets into rivers, washing away any hope that someone might see me stumbling through the darkness and stop to help. I walked for hours, or maybe it was minutes, or maybe time had simply stopped meaning anything at all. Every step sent pain shooting through my bare feet. My ruined dress clung to my skin like a shroud. My daughter kicked and squirmed, as restless as I was. I tried to go home first. The townhouse Marcus and I shared in the historic district, the place I had decorated with such care, choosing every piece of furniture, every work of art, every throw pillow to create a sanctuary. A home. The locks had been changed. I stood in the rain, jabbing my key at a door that no longer opened for me, and felt something crack inside my chest. He had planned this. While I was spending 3 months organizing his charity gala, he was changing the locks on our home. While I was choosing flowers and approving menus, he was preparing to throw me away. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. The screen was cracked, probably from when I had stumbled on the estate steps. Water droplets distorted the display, but I could still see my contacts, still see all the names of people I had called friends. I pressed call. The first number went straight to voicemail. Jennifer, my former college roommate, who had been my maid of honor. We had stayed close, or so I thought. Monthly brunches, regular phone calls. She had thrown me a baby shower just 2 months ago. Her voicemail message was cheerful and impersonal. "Leave a message after the beep." I did not leave a message. The second number rang and rang until it clicked to silence. No voicemail, no explanation, just abandonment wrapped in a dial tone. The third number was answered, finally, by a voice I had trusted for years. Sandra, my closest friend in Marcus's social circle. The woman who had held my hand through my miscarriage. The woman who had promised she would always be there for me, Carolina. Her voice was cold in a way I had never heard before. "I cannot get involved. You understand, right? The Ashfords, they are too powerful. I am sorry. Sandra, please. I just need somewhere to stay for the night. Just one night until I can figure out what to do. I cannot. Richard would never forgive me if I took sides against Marcus. We have business dealings with the Ashfords. Our children go to school with their cousins. I cannot click. The connection died, and I stood there in the rain, staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. Sandra, who had cried at my wedding, who had bought my unborn daughter her first dress, who had promised she would always be there. Gone. Just like that. I tried Barbara next. She claimed she was in Bali with no service. I could see her Instagram story from the gala. Posted 5 minutes ago. A photo of the ice sculpture with the caption, "Fabulous evening with fabulous people." Apparently, her Bali retreat had excellent Wi-Fi and a direct view of the Ashford Ballroom. I tried 7 more numbers, 7 more friends, 7 more people who had eaten at my table, accepted my hospitality, smiled at me across charity events and dinner parties. 7 more rejections. Some were apologetic, some were cold, some did not answer at all. But the message was the same from everyone. The Ashfords were too powerful, too connected, too dangerous to cross. And I was nothing now. Worse than nothing. I was a liability. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the wet pavement. I did not bother picking it up. What was the point? Who was left to call? That was when the pain hit. It started as a tightening in my abdomen, a cramping sensation that made me double over. Then it intensified, wave after wave of pressure and pain that drove me to my knees on the wet sidewalk. No, not now. Please, not now. My daughter was not due for another 8 weeks. It was too soon. She was too small. I could not lose her too. Not after everything else. I managed to retrieve my phone, managed to dial 911 with fingers that would not stop shaking. The operator's voice was calm and professional, asking questions I could barely answer. Where was I? What was wrong? Was I having contractions? An ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. 20 minutes of crouching on a wet sidewalk, praying to a God I was not sure I believed in anymore, begging my daughter to hold on. The paramedics were kind. They wrapped me in blankets, loaded me onto a stretcher, asked questions in soothing voices. One of them, a woman about my age with kind eyes and a gentle touch, held my hand during the drive to the hospital. "You're going to be okay," she said. "Your baby is going to be okay. Just breathe." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her, because if I lost my daughter after losing everything else, I did not know how I would survive. The hospital was bright and cold and smelled like antiseptic and fear. Nurses rushed me to a room, hooked me up to monitors, attached sensors to my belly that tracked my daughter's heartbeat. Beep, beep, beep. The most beautiful sound in the world. She was still alive, still fighting. "We need to contact your emergency contact," a nurse said, clipboard in hand. "It says here Marcus Ashford." I closed my eyes. No, not him. Please, anyone but him. But they called anyway. Hospital policy. He was still my husband. Still the father of my unborn child. Still the man whose name was on all my paperwork. He did not come. Of course he did not come. He was too busy celebrating his victory with his pregnant mistress and his satisfied mother. Too busy accepting congratulations on his fresh start. Too busy erasing every trace of the woman he had just destroyed. His lawyer came instead. The man walked into my hospital room like he owned it, which, given who was paying him, he probably felt he did. Expensive suit, leather briefcase, smile that did not reach his eyes. His name was Richard Hollister, I later learned. One of the most ruthless family law attorneys in the city. The kind of man who built his career on destroying women in divorce proceedings. Mrs. Ashford, he did not sit. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not so much as glance at the monitors tracking my daughter's heartbeat. "Mr. Ashford has instructed me to inform you that divorce proceedings have been initiated. He is seeking full custody of the child upon birth." I stared at him, not comprehending. Full custody. Additionally, all joint accounts have been frozen pending the divorce settlement. Your access to Ashford properties has been revoked. He checked his watch, actually checked his watch, while I lay in a hospital bed, fighting to save my pregnancy. Mr. Ashford is prepared to be generous. Sign over full custody, and he will not pursue you for the debt you have accumulated on his accounts. The monitors beeped faster. My blood pressure was spiking. I could feel panic rising in my chest, tightening my throat, making it hard to breathe. Debt, I managed. What debt? The household expenses, Richard said smoothly. The charity gala costs, the medical bills from your previous miscarriage, all charged to Mr. Ashford's accounts. All technically, debts you owe him now that the marriage is ending. I had spent my own money on those things, or what I thought was my own money. But apparently, there was no such thing as my own money. There never had been. A nurse rushed in, alarmed by the beeping monitors. You need to leave, she told Richard firmly. My patient needs rest, not stress. He shrugged, dropping a business card on my bedside table. Call when you are ready to be reasonable. The door burst open before he could leave. A woman stormed in like a force of nature, gray hair wild from the rain, eyes blazing with a fury I had never seen before. Eleanor Crawford, Ellie, the only friend I had who had nothing to do with the Ashford social circle. I had met her at a volunteer event years ago before I married Marcus, and we had stayed in touch, despite Vivian's pointed comments about associating with divorced women who ran homeless shelters. Get out, Ellie told Richard, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced down far more intimidating adversaries than a corporate lawyer. Get out before I call security. And tell Marcus that the only thing more pathetic than a man who abandons his pregnant wife is a lawyer who helps him do it. Richard opened his mouth to respond, thought better of it, and left without another word. Even high-priced attorneys knew better than to argue with Eleanor Crawford when her blood was up. She rushed to my bedside, taking my hand in both of hers. Her grip was warm and solid and real in a world that had become cold and slippery and untrustworthy. Oh, honey, she said, her voice softening. I saw the news. I came as fast as I could. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I broke then. All the shock and fear and humiliation I had been holding back came flooding out in sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for my marriage. I cried for my home. I cried for the friends who had abandoned me. I cried for the life I had built that had turned out to be nothing but smoke and mirrors. And I cried for my daughter, who might be born into a world where her own father did not want her. Ellie held me through all of it. She did not offer empty reassurances or meaningless platitudes. She did not tell me everything would be okay or that I was better off without him. She just held me and let me cry until I had no tears left. When I finally quieted, when the sobs had faded to hiccups and the hiccups to exhausted silence, she spoke. Honey, I have been divorced twice. You know what both those men had in common? They thought the paperwork would break me. They thought the courts would crush me. They thought I would just give up and let them take whatever they wanted. She squeezed my hand, her eyes fierce and certain. But here is the secret. Paperwork is just paper. Courts are just buildings full of people who can be convinced. And you, Carolina Bennett, are flesh and blood and bone and a mother protecting her child. You outlast paper. You outlast buildings. You outlast anything they can throw at you. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, every single time. The doctor came then, with news that was both relief and warning. My daughter was stable. Her heartbeat was strong, but I was showing signs of preterm labor brought on by severe stress. I needed to stay calm, needed rest, needed to avoid any further trauma. He did not understand that trauma was all I had left. That night, after the doctors finished their tests and the nurses completed their rounds, Ellie sat beside my bed in the uncomfortable hospital chair and made phone calls. She found me a place to stay, a women's shelter called Harmony House that she helped run. She arranged for someone to bring me clothes. Since everything I owned was locked inside the townhouse, I could no longer enter. She did everything while I lay in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling myself disappearing. My phone buzzed on the bedside table, that same unknown number from the gala. This time, there was a voicemail. I almost did not listen. I was tired and broken and could not imagine any news that was not terrible, but something made me press play. Ms. Bennett, a man's voice, formal and precise. This is Raymond Cross from Cross and Associates. This concerns your grandfather's estate. It is urgent that you call me immediately. I frowned at the phone. Grandfather's estate? Both of my grandfathers had died before I was born. My father's father to a heart attack, my mother's father to... Well, I did not actually know. My mother never talked about him. Probably a scam, I muttered, deleting the voicemail. Or some kind of debt collector trying a new angle. It was the biggest mistake of my life. It was also, somehow, the best thing that could have happened. Because the call would come again. And by then, I would be desperate enough to answer. They released me from the hospital 3 days later with a stack of paperwork, a bottle of prenatal vitamins, and strict instructions to avoid stress. As if stress was something I could simply choose to avoid. As if I could opt out of having my life destroyed. Ellie drove me to Harmony House in her ancient Honda, the heater rattling and coughing warm air that smelled faintly of coffee and determination. I watched the city change through the window as we traveled from the gleaming towers of downtown to neighborhoods I had never visited, where paint peeled from buildings and police sirens served as lullabies. The shelter was a converted Victorian that had seen better decades. 3 stories of weathered brick and sagging gutters, with a garden out front that someone had tried valiantly to maintain despite the approaching winter. A sign by the door read, Harmony House Women's Shelter, in faded letters. I planned parties for people who donate to places like this, I said, as Ellie helped me out of the car. She gave me a look that was equal parts sympathy and steel. Now you need what places like this provide. There is no shame in that, Carrie. There is no shame in accepting help when you need it. She was right, of course. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your bones are 2 very different things. The front door opened onto a common room furnished with donated couches and secondhand lamps. A TV played softly in the corner. The smell of something cooking, soup maybe, drifted from somewhere deeper in the building. 3 women looked up as we entered. The first was Donna, mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much. The second was Martha, maybe 60, with a kind face and flour-dusted hands. The third was younger, early 20s, with a baby on her hip and dark circles under her eyes. Donna took one look at me, at my expensive haircut and my designer maternity clothes, borrowed from Ellie, since mine were all locked in the townhouse, and smirked. Let me guess, husband kicked you out. How did you know? I asked. Honey, she said, rising from the couch. Half of us were exactly where you are. Money does not stop men from being trash. It just means they can afford better lawyers and bigger houses to throw you out of. My ex had 3 houses, Martha added from her corner, and 4 girlfriends. Now he has 2 houses and an ankle monitor. Life comes at you fast. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Almost. Ellie showed me to my room. It was small, barely bigger than a closet, with a thin mattress on a metal frame and a window that overlooked the overgrown backyard. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow that felt like mockery. The single lamp flickered when I turned it on. This was it. This was my life now. 4 weeks ago, I had been planning a charity gala in a mansion. Now I was living in a homeless shelter, with a baby on the way and a husband who was trying to take her from me. I will check on you tomorrow, Ellie promised, squeezing my shoulder. Try to rest. You and your baby need it. After she left, I sat on that thin mattress and let the reality wash over me. I had no money. The joint accounts were frozen, and my personal savings, which I had foolishly kept in an account Marcus had access to, had been transferred to an account with only his name. I had no home. The townhouse was in Marcus's name, and my access had been revoked. I had no family. My parents had made their position clear by refusing to answer my calls. I had no friends. Everyone I thought I knew had abandoned me the moment the Ashfords decided I was worthless. All I had was a baby due in 8 weeks and a determination not to let them win. It did not feel like enough, but it was all I had. The next morning brought fresh horrors. I borrowed a phone from Donna to check the news and immediately wished I had not. Vivian Ashford had launched her campaign. Articles appeared on every society website and gossip blog. Ashford heir escapes troubled marriage screamed one headline. Sources close to the family describe Carolina Bennett as unstable, manipulative, and potentially mentally ill. Former friends gave anonymous quotes. She always seemed a little off. There was something desperate about her. I am not surprised it ended this way. Marcus was quoted directly. I tried everything to help her, he said, but some people cannot be helped. I only wish I had seen the truth sooner, for my own sake and for the sake of my unborn child. My unborn child. Like she was already his. Like I was just an incubator he was waiting to discard. But the worst blow, the one that drove me to my knees on the cold floor of my tiny room, came from my own family. My mother had released a statement through her lawyer. We support Marcus Ashford during this difficult time. Our daughter has struggled with emotional issues for years. We hope she gets the help she needs. My own mother, the woman who had raised me, who had held me when I cried, who had told me I could be anything I wanted to be, she had chosen her social standing over her pregnant daughter. She had called me crazy in public to protect her country club membership. My father was even more direct. A single text message that read, "You made your choices. Now live with them." I stared at that message for a long time. Then I put the phone down and did not look at it again for 3 days. The legal aid lawyer came on Friday. Her name was Stephanie Park, 28 years old with tired eyes and a caseload that would have crushed anyone with less determination. She sat across from me in the shelter's cramped office and explained my situation with brutal honesty. Marcus filed in a county where the judge is his father's golf buddy, she said, flipping through the papers. They have evidence that you are living in a shelter, that you have no income, no stable housing, no support system. They are building a case that you are an unfit mother. But I was thrown out, I protested. He froze my accounts. He changed the locks. He publicly humiliated me. None of this is my fault. Shall Stephanie's eyes were sympathetic, but exhausted. I know. And I will do everything I can to fight for you. But they have resources we do not have. They have lawyers who bill more per hour than I make in a week. They have experts who will say whatever they are paid to say. The best I can promise is a fight. I cannot promise we will win. I sat back, feeling the weight of her words settle over me like a shroud. The system is designed to make you give up. Donna told me that night as we sat in the common room. The other women gathered around like a support group that no one had asked for but everyone needed. Every form they make you fill out, every hearing they schedule at impossible times, every expert they hire to call you crazy. It is all a test. What kind of test? I asked. The kind that separates the women who give up from the women who do not. Donna's eyes were fierce in the dim light. The ones who win are not the ones with the most money or the best lawyers. They are the ones who refuse to stop fighting. You stop fighting, you already lost. Those words stayed with me. They became my lifeline over the following weeks. I applied for government assistance and was denied because, technically, I was still married to a millionaire. The fact that I could not access any of his money did not seem to matter. I applied for jobs and was rejected again and again because no one wanted to hire a woman who could go into labor at any moment. The fact that I needed to work to survive did not seem to matter. I tried to access my own savings account, the one I had opened before I met Marcus, and discovered it had been transferred to an account with only his name. The fact that it was my money, earned before our marriage, did not seem to matter. Every door closed, every option vanished. Every day brought new evidence that the world was not built for women like me. And then, at my lowest moment, the phone rang again. I was sitting in the shelter's cramped kitchen at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, eating peanut butter from a jar because I had missed dinner. The borrowed phone buzzed on the counter. That same unknown number, that same local area code. I had nothing left to lose. I answered. Ms. Bennett? A man's voice, formal, but with a warmth beneath the professionalism. My name is Raymond Cross. I have been trying to reach you for weeks. This concerns your grandfather's estate. I do not have a grandfather, I said flatly. Both of my grandfathers died before I was born. Your mother's father, Cross corrected gently. Benjamin Cole? She chose not to maintain the relationship, but he never stopped watching over you. I went still. Benjamin Cole. The name meant nothing to me. My mother had never spoken about her father. When I asked as a child, she had changed the subject so quickly and so completely that I had learned not to ask again. Miss Bennett, before his death 5 years ago, your grandfather was worth $400 million. He left most of it to charity. But 80 million, Cross paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. 80 million, he left for you. The peanut butter jar slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. I barely noticed. However, Cross continued, there are conditions. Your grandfather despised inherited wealth. He watched it destroy 2 generations of his children, including your mother, who chose comfort over character and cut ties with him when he refused to fund her lifestyle. He wanted to ensure his money went to someone who understood its value. I sank into a chair, my mind reeling. $80 million, my grandfather. Conditions. I do not understand, I whispered. I know you do not. That is why we need to meet in person. Can you come to my office tomorrow? I looked around the shelter kitchen. Cracked linoleum floor, flickering fluorescent lights, the shattered jar of peanut butter at my feet, a pregnant woman in borrowed clothes with nothing to her name but a baby who was not even born yet. Yes, I said, I can come. I hung up and sat there for a long time, feeling my daughter kick inside me, wondering if this was hope or just another trap. I did not know it then, but my grandfather was not going to save me. He was going to make me save myself. And that was exactly what I needed. The law offices of Cross and Associates occupied a modest building on the edge of the financial district, wedged between a bakery and a dry cleaner. It was not the kind of place you would expect to manage an $80 million estate. No marble lobby, no crystal chandeliers, just a simple wooden door with a brass plaque that read, Cross and Associates, Estent, 1952. I had taken 3 buses to get there, a journey that would have been a 15-minute drive in the car I no longer had. My feet ached, My back screamed. My daughter kicked relentlessly, as if she too was eager to hear what this mysterious grandfather had left behind. Raymond Cross met me in the lobby himself. He was 70 years old, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. His suit was well made, but not flashy. His handshake was firm but kind. He looked like a man who had spent his life keeping secrets and had become comfortable with the weight of them. "Mrs. Ashford," he said. "Bennett," I corrected. "Carolina Bennett. I am not an Ashford anymore." His eyes softened with something that might have been approval. "Bennett, then. Please follow me." His office was exactly what I expected. Wood-paneled walls lined with books and photographs. A heavy desk covered in papers. 2 leather chairs facing each other across an antique coffee table. On the wall behind his desk hung a single photograph of a man I did not recognize. Cross saw me looking. "Your grandfather," he said. "Benjamin Cole." I studied the face in the photograph. Sharp features, intelligent eyes, the hint of a smile that suggested he knew secrets no one else did. I looked for some resemblance to myself and found it in the shape of the jaw, the set of the eyes. "I never knew him," I said. "Your mother made sure of that." Cross gestured for me to sit. "She cut ties with Benjamin when you were 3 years old. He refused to fund the lifestyle she wanted, and she decided she would rather have no father than a father who held her accountable." That sounded like my mother. She had always been obsessed with appearances, with status, with being seen as successful. She had been so proud when I married Marcus. Her daughter, married to an Ashford. She had bragged about it to everyone who would listen, and now she had publicly declared me mentally ill rather than admit her son-in-law had thrown me away. Cross slid a folder across the coffee table. "But Benjamin never stopped watching you. He hired investigators, received reports, documented everything about your life. He knew about your marriage, your miscarriage, your work planning events. He knew about the night at the gala. He knew about the hospital." A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been watching me for years, documenting my failures and successes without my knowledge. "Why?" I asked. "Because he wanted to know if you were worth his legacy." Cross opened the folder, revealing page after page of documents. Benjamin Cole was worth $400 million when he died 5 years ago. He left most of it to charity: schools, hospitals, shelters for women in crisis. He had very specific ideas about how wealth should be used. And the rest? $80 million? Left in trust for his granddaughter, Carolina Bennett? With conditions. He handed me a single sheet of paper. The conditions were listed in precise legal language. First, she must demonstrate entrepreneurial initiative. She must start a business from nothing, not use the inheritance to buy an existing enterprise. Second, she must demonstrate resilience under adversity. Documented evidence of overcoming genuine obstacles. Third, she must do this independently. No family connections, no inherited advantages, no relying on the Ashford name or anyone else's. Fourth, the money releases in stages based on demonstrated progress, not all at once. Fifth, a trust observer has been watching her for the past 20 years. His reports will determine when conditions are met. I looked up from the paper. He wanted me to earn it. Cross nodded. Benjamin believed that money given freely destroys character. He watched it happen to his children and grandchildren. Your mother. Your uncle, who died of a drug overdose at 32. Your cousins, who have never worked a day in their lives and call themselves influencers. He wanted something different for you. But I have been married to Marcus for 4 years. I have not started a business. I have not overcome anything until now. You have planned events for some of the wealthiest and most demanding clients in the city, Cross countered. You have built relationships with vendors and suppliers across multiple industries. You have learned how that world operates from the inside. And now, he leaned forward, you have been thrown out with nothing but your intelligence and your determination. You are about to be a single mother fighting for custody against one of the most powerful families in the city. If that is not adversity, I do not know what is. I sat back, trying to process everything. My grandfather had been watching me my entire life. He had seen everything I had done, everything I had failed to do. And somehow, he had decided I was worth $80 million. But only if I proved myself worthy of it. What about now? I asked. I have nothing. I am living in a women's shelter. I cannot fight the Ashfords with nothing. Cross smiled. That is why the trust has some flexibility. Given the documented adversity you have experienced in the past month, the first stage of your inheritance has been released. How much? $50,000. I exhaled sharply. $50,000. More money than I had ever had access to on my own. But against the Ashford resources, their millions of dollars and armies of lawyers and judges in their pockets, it was nothing. A slingshot against a tank. It is not enough to defeat them, Cross acknowledged, reading my expression, but it is enough to begin. Your grandfather believed that the journey was more important than the destination. He wanted you to build something, not just receive something. He handed me a black card. The accounts are activated. Use the money wisely. I took the card, feeling its weight in my hand. $50,000 and a set of impossible conditions. It was not much, but it was more than I had yesterday. How do I unlock more? I asked. Demonstrate progress. Start your business. Show resilience. The Trust Observer will document everything and report back. When you have proven yourself, more funds will be released. Up to the full $80 million. I left that office with my mind racing. $50,000. Enough to rent a small apartment, enough to buy proper clothes for job interviews, enough to hire a lawyer who was not drowning in cases. But was it enough to build something? To fight back? To protect my daughter from a family that had decided she was worthless before she was even born? I spent the bus ride back to the shelter, thinking about everything I had learned during 4 years as an Ashford wife. The suppliers who were underpaid and disrespected. The employees who were overworked and undervalued. The competitors who would love insider knowledge about Ashford weaknesses. I knew things. I knew which vendors hated working with Marcus's company. I knew which businesses were vulnerable. I knew secrets that had been shared in my presence because no one thought the pretty wife was paying attention. You spent 6 years learning their world, Ellie said when I told her everything that night. Most people would see that as wasted time, years you gave to a man who did not deserve them. But I see it differently. I see reconnaissance. You were behind enemy lines for 6 years, Carrie, and you did not even know you were gathering intelligence. I looked at her, this woman who had lost everything twice and rebuilt herself both times. Could I do the same? Could I take the wreckage of my life and build something new from the ashes? There is only one way to find out, I said. 3 weeks later, I went into labor. It was sudden, earlier than expected, happening in the middle of the night in my tiny room at the shelter. Ellie rushed me to the hospital in her ancient Honda, holding my hand at red lights, talking me through the contraction. 14 hours later, I held my daughter for the first time. She was small, just 6 pounds, but perfect. Dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom, tiny fingers that wrapped around my thumb like she would never let go. A cry that was more determined than distressed, like she was announcing her arrival to a world that had better be ready for her. I named her Hope Marie Bennett, not Ashford. Bennett, my family name, the name I had given up when I married Marcus and was now reclaiming. "I am going to build you a world where no one can ever throw you away," I whispered to her as she nursed for the first time. "I promise. Mama promises." Looking at her tiny face, I understood for the first time what I was fighting for. Not revenge, not vindication, not even my own survival. I was fighting for her future, and I would not stop until it was secure. 6 months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and relentless work. I moved out of Harmony House into a small apartment on the edge of a decent neighborhood. It was nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, and a bedroom that doubled as my office. But it was mine. I paid for it with money I had earned, not money that belonged to Marcus Ashford. Bennett Events started at my kitchen table during Hope's naps. I reached out to every vendor I had worked with during my years planning Ashford events. The caterers and florists and photographers and musicians who had been underpaid and disrespected and forced to wait months for checks that should have been written weeks ago. "The Ashfords owe me $40,000, said Gerald Henderson, owner of the best catering company in the city. "They act like I should be grateful they hired me at all. You paid me in 2 weeks, Mrs. Bennett. Full amount, no complaints. I am yours." One vendor became two became five became 10. Word spread quietly through the supplier community that there was an alternative to the Ashford empire. Someone who paid on time, treated people fairly, and actually said thank you. I landed my first client through a referral from Henderson. A tech startup wanted to throw a launch party, but hated the stuffy old money atmosphere of traditional event planners. I gave them something different, something fresh, something that felt like the future instead of the past. They were thrilled. They referred me to 2 other companies. Bennett Events grew. The second stage of my inheritance released when I showed Raymond Cross my business plan and my first quarter earnings, $200,000, enough to hire a part-time assistant, rent a tiny office space, and invest in proper marketing materials. But I did not hire an assistant or rent an office. I put every penny back into the business, growing it as fast as I could while hope grew alongside it. Those months were the hardest of my life. I would take client calls while nursing. I would write proposals during nap time. I would negotiate contracts while bouncing a fussy baby on my hip. I learned to mute my phone at strategic moments and unmute it with perfect timing. One afternoon, I was on a call with a potential client discussing floral arrangements, while simultaneously dealing with a diaper situation that could only be described as catastrophic. "We need the arrangements to convey sophistication and warmth," the client was saying. I hit mute just in time. "Oh, Hope," I whispered, staring at the disaster before me. "That is definitely not sophisticated. Unmute." "Absolutely," I said in my most professional voice. "I am thinking white roses with subtle gold accents. Something elegant but approachable." Ellie, who was visiting and had witnessed the entire exchange, shook her head in amazement. "You are terrifying. You know that?" I smiled, cleaned up my daughter, and closed the deal. By the time Hope was 6 months old, Bennett Events was worth $500,000. We had a client list that included 3 tech companies, a nonprofit, and a very exclusive wedding that had been the talk of the society pages. The society pages that used to talk about me as Marcus Ashford's wife now talked about Bennett Events as the hottest new planning company in the city. My new lawyer was a woman named Margaret Shaw, Maggie, to her friends. She was 55 years old, a former federal prosecutor, and she had a reputation for destroying people in family court. Her hourly rate was $800, and she was worth every penny. "You have documented income," she told me during our meeting, "to prepare for the custody hearing. You have stable housing. You have a support system. You have built a successful business from nothing in 6 months while caring for an infant. The judge will have to consider all of that." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to hope. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in March. I wore my best suit, kept my hands steady, and presented my case clearly and professionally. Maggie was brilliant. She walked the court through my transformation from dependent wife to independent businesswoman. She presented evidence of my income, my housing, my childcare arrangements. She called character witnesses, including Ellie and 3 of my vendors, who testified to my reliability and character. Marcus's lawyers tried their usual tactics. They brought up the women's shelter, tried to paint me as unstable, but I had answers for everything. The shelter was temporary. The instability was manufactured by their client. Every setback I had faced had been caused by the man who was now trying to take my daughter. I could see the momentum shifting. The judge, a woman named Harrison, who I had been warned was friendly with Marcus's family, seemed to be listening. Really listening. Then Marcus's lawyers called their surprise witness. Her name was Dr. Patricia Lawson, a psychiatrist with impressive credentials from impressive institutions. She had never met me. She had never evaluated me. But she had reviewed my records, whatever that meant, and was prepared to testify that I showed signs of delusional thinking, paranoid behavior, and emotional instability. I watched in disbelief as this woman, this stranger, described my mental state to the court as if she knew anything about me at all. But the real blow came when they presented their evidence. Photographs of me at the women's shelter, taken without my knowledge, showing me looking exhausted and desperate. Photographs of my first apartment, tiny and sparse, with captions suggesting it was unsuitable for a child. A psychiatric evaluation I had never participated in, filled with diagnoses I did not have. And Judge Harrison, who played golf with Marcus's father every Saturday, nodded along to every accusation like she had already made up her mind before the hearing even started. The ruling came down like a guillotine. Temporary custody to the father. The mother will have supervised visitation only, 2 hours twice weekly, in a monitored facility. Full custody hearing to be scheduled in 6 months. I do not remember leaving the courthouse. I do not remember the drive back to my apartment. I only remember Ellie holding me back 2 days later as a social worker took Hope from my arms. "Mama," Hope cried, reaching for me as they carried her away. "Mama, mama, mama." I collapsed when the door closed behind them. Fell to my knees on the floor of the apartment I had worked so hard to afford, the apartment that was supposed to be my daughter's home, and screamed until my throat was raw. I had done everything right, built a business from nothing, found stable housing, created a support system, fought every single day for 6 months to prove I was worthy of my own child, and they took her anyway, because in their world, justice was not blind. Justice belonged to whoever could afford to buy it, and I could not afford what the Ashfords were willing to pay. I spent 7 days in darkness. I did not eat. I did not sleep. Not really, just fitful hours of unconsciousness, interrupted by nightmares of my daughter crying for me. I did not answer calls or respond to texts, or do anything at all except sit in Hope's empty room, holding the stuffed elephant she had slept with every night, staring at walls I had painted yellow because I read somewhere that yellow was a happy color for babies. The apartment was too quiet. No cooing, no crying, no small warm body pressed against mine in the early morning hours. Just silence and the ticking of a clock and the slow suffocation of grief. Ellie found me there on the 7th day. She did not knock. She used the key I had given her for emergencies and walked into my apartment like she had every right to be there. She found me in Hope's room, unwashed and hollow-eyed, still wearing the same clothes I had worn when they took her. She did not offer comfort. She did not tell me everything would be okay. She did not pretend that what had happened was anything less than devastating. Instead, she told me a story. When I was 32 years old, she said, sitting down on the floor beside me, my first husband took my kids. Tommy was 6. Sarah was 4. He had better lawyers and more money and a judge who believed fathers when they said mothers were crazy. I did exactly what you are doing right now. I fell apart. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped functioning as a human being. I thought if I could just grieve hard enough, long enough, the universe would take pity on me and give my children back, and it did not work that way. She turned to look at me, her eyes fierce with a pain that had never fully healed. By the time I pulled myself together, he had them for 8 months. 8 months of telling them Mama was sick. Mama did not want them. Mama chose her problems over them. 8 months of poisoning them against me while I sat in a dark room and cried. I got them back eventually. It took me 3 years of fighting, 3 years of proving myself, 3 years of documenting every lie he told and every promise he broke. But I lost something I can never get back. Those months, those memories, the trust that children have in parents who do not leave. She grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to look at her. Tommy is 34 years old now, Carrie, and he still has trouble believing I will not leave again. He still flinches sometimes when I say goodbye. He still waits for me to disappear. Her voice broke, but she pushed through. You do not have 3 years. You do not even have 6 months. Every single day you spend falling apart is a day Hope spends wondering why Mama is not coming. It is a day Marcus and his mother spend poisoning her against you. It is a day you lose forever and can never get back. She shook me hard. So here's what is going to happen. You are going to get up. You are going to shower. You are going to eat something. And then you are going to fight like your daughter's future depends on it. Because it does. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman who had survived everything I was going through, who had lost her children and got them back, who had been broken and rebuilt herself, twice. If she could do it, maybe I could too. I need to make a phone call, I said. I called Raymond Cross and demanded the next phase of my inheritance. The conditions, he started. I have a business worth $500,000, I interrupted, my voice stronger than it had been in days. A business I built from nothing, while caring for a newborn and fighting for custody. I have faced documented adversity that would break most people. I have demonstrated resilience that your trust observer has surely recorded. Now I need the resources to finish this fight. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Cross thinking, weighing the conditions against my circumstances, deciding whether I had earned what I was asking for. Your grandfather would have liked you, Ms. Bennett, he said finally. I am authorizing the second major release, $500,000. I did not use a penny of it on myself. I hired Margaret Shaw, full-time, giving her the resources she needed to dedicate herself entirely to my case. I hired Frank Donovan, a 63-year-old former FBI agent turned private investigator who specialized in financial crimes and had a reputation for finding things people wanted to stay hidden. I hired Susan Wells, a forensic accountant who had testified in dozens of fraud cases and knew exactly where to look for buried secrets. Find everything, I told them. Every skeleton, every secret, every dirty deal the Ashfords have ever made. I want to know everything they have done to every woman who ever got in their way. They got to work. 3 weeks later, Frank Donovan walked into my apartment with a folder that would change everything. Destiny Blake is not her real name, he said, spreading photographs across my kitchen table. She is Diana Brooks, and this is the 3rd time she has pulled this exact scheme. He showed me documentation from 2 previous marriages, both to wealthy men, both ending with Diana disappearing with a significant portion of their assets. There were fraud charges pending in 2 states, but she was careful. She always moved on before they could catch up with her. She targets rich men, Frank explained, gets pregnant, or claims to, extracts as much money as she can, then disappears. She is a professional, but that was not the most important thing he found. Marcus has done this before, Frank continued, not with con artists, but with women he got pregnant and wanted to get rid of. He showed me 2 more files, 2 more women, 2 more stories of destruction. Rebecca Moore, 5 years before me. She had gotten pregnant, refused to terminate, and been paid off. $500,000 to disappear and never speak of Marcus Ashford again. Jennifer Walsh, 8 years before me. Same pattern, but she had tried to fight. She had hired lawyers and gone to court and refused to give up her child. She had a mental breakdown, Frank said quietly, was institutionalized on a recommendation from a psychiatrist paid by the Ashfords. She is still there. I stared at those files, feeling sick. They have been doing this for years, I whispered, destroying women who become inconvenient. They have a system. And they have gotten very good at it, Maggie added grimly. But they have never faced someone who knows exactly what they are doing and has the resources to fight back. Susan, the forensic accountant, had found something too. Vivian Ashford has been embezzling from her own foundation, she reported. Small amounts, nothing that would attract attention, but consistent. About $50,000 a year for the past decade, funneled into accounts in the Cayman Islands. Tax fraud, wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. I looked at the evidence spread across my table. Destiny's con artist history. Marcus's pattern of destroying pregnant women. Vivian's embezzlement. It was enough to bring them down. But I had to be careful. If I used it too soon, if I tipped them off, they would find a way to bury it. To bury me. We need to be strategic, I said. We cannot come at them with everything at once. We need to cut off their escape routes first. Maggie nodded approvingly. What are you thinking? We start with Destiny. She is Marcus's exit strategy, his way to legitimize everything he has done. If we can get her to leave voluntarily, or better yet, turn on him, we remove his strongest piece from the board. Frank raised an eyebrow. You want to flip a con artist? I want to give her a better deal than Marcus is offering. I leaned forward, feeling the strategic part of my mind, the part I had suppressed for 4 years of marriage, finally coming alive. Destiny is not loyal to Marcus. She is loyal to money. If I can convince her that staying is more dangerous than leaving, she will leave. And if I can convince her to give me information on her way out, even better. That night, I wrote a message to a phone number Frank had obtained through means I did not ask about. I know who you really are, Diana Brooks. Meet me, or the Ashfords find out first. The response came 3 hours later. Where and when? We met in a coffee shop 2 hours outside the city. Neutral territory. Public enough to be safe, private enough for the kind of conversation we needed to have. Destiny arrived looking exactly like her Instagram photos, beautiful in that carefully curated way that suggested every feature had been optimized for maximum impact. Blonde hair, designer clothes, manicured nails. The kind of woman who walked into a room and knew every eye would turn toward her. She was also nervous. I could see it in the way she scanned the room before sitting down, the way her fingers drummed against the table, the way her smile did not quite reach her eyes. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, documents, newspaper clippings from her previous schemes. Diana Brooks, then Diana Mitchell, then Destiny Blake. 3 identities, 3 wealthy targets, 3 disappearing acts. How many families have you destroyed? I asked. I expected her to deny it, to lie, to cry and claim she did not know what I was talking about. She laughed. You think you are the first person to figure me out? She leaned back in her chair, suddenly confident. Honey, I have been doing this for 12 years. I always know when someone is getting close, and I always have an exit strategy. I studied her face, looking for the tells that Frank had taught me to recognize. The slight tightening around the eyes that indicated fear, the micro expressions that betrayed hidden calculations. Then why are you here? I asked. Because you interest me. Destiny picked up her coffee, took a sip. The other wives, they just wanted to hurt me. Scratch my face, call me names. Very dramatic, very boring. But you, she tilted her head, you built a business in 6 months while fighting for custody. You hired a team of investigators to dig up my past. You are not just angry, you are strategic. I did not respond. Let her talk, and that makes me curious, she continued. What do you actually want? Money? I can write you a check right now. Revenge? I can disappear tomorrow and you will never see me again. What is it? I want information, I said. I want to understand exactly what I am dealing with. And I want you to choose which side you are going to be on when everything falls apart. Destiny studied me for a long moment. I could almost see the calculations running behind her eyes. Risk versus reward. Danger versus opportunity. Let me tell you something about the Ashfords, she said finally. Something that is not in any file your investigator found. Marcus is desperate. More desperate than you know. The family trust has a clause. If he does not have a legitimate heir by 40, control of everything passes to his brother Daniel. Marcus turns 40 in 18 months. I knew about the trust. Frank had found documentation, but I had not understood the timeline. That is why he threw me out, I said slowly. That is why he moved so fast to divorce me and marry you. He needed to legitimize your pregnancy before anyone looked too closely. Smart girl, Destiny nodded approvingly. He was going to marry me in 3 months. Quick ceremony. Quick annulment of your marriage. Everything wrapped up in a nice legal bow before the deadline. And the baby? For the first time, something genuine flickered across Destiny's face. Something almost like regret. I am pregnant, she said, but I am not entirely sure it is his. I felt my stomach drop. Not sure? There was someone else, right before I started with Marcus. The timing is close. It could be either one. She shrugged. I was going to do a DNA test after the wedding. If it was his, great. If not, well, I would figure something out. She said it so casually. Like creating a life was just another variable in her calculations. Like my daughter and I were just obstacles to be managed. But that was not the worst part. You are not the first, Destiny continued. You know that, right? There were others. Other women Marcus got pregnant. Other problems that had to be cleaned up. Rebecca Moore, I said. Jennifer Walsh. Destiny's eyes widened slightly. You found them. What happened to them? Rebecca took the money. $500,000 to disappear, sign an NDA, never mention Marcus Ashford again. She is living in Montana now. Last I heard, new name, new life. Destiny paused, her expression darkening. Jennifer was not so smart. She tried to fight, hired lawyers, went to court, refused to give up. Vivian had her institutionalized, manufactured a breakdown with the help of a very cooperative psychiatrist. She has been in there for 8 years now. I felt the blood drain from my face. 8 years? 8 years locked in a psychiatric facility because she had tried to protect her child. That was almost me. That was still me, if I failed. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Destiny was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, lower, more honest than it had been all afternoon. Because I am a con artist, not a monster. I take money from men who have too much of it. I play games with people who can afford to lose. But what they did to Jennifer, she shook her head. That is something else. That is evil. She met my eyes. And what they were going to do to you and your daughter, that is evil too. I have done a lot of bad things in my life, Carrie. but I have never destroyed an innocent woman's entire life just because she got pregnant. We talked for another hour, negotiating, planning, building an alliance that neither of us would have expected. The deal we reached was simple. Destiny would leave, but on her timeline. She needed another month to secure assets Marcus did not know she could access. In exchange, she would leave behind documentation of Vivian's embezzlement and everything she knew about Rebecca and Jennifer. And one more thing. Before I go, Destiny said, sliding a phone number across the table, you should call this woman. Her name is Rebecca Moore. She has been waiting a long time for someone to finally fight back. 1 month later, Destiny Blake vanished. She cleaned out accounts Marcus did not know she had access to. She took approximately $3 million and disappeared so completely that even Frank Donovan could not find her. She also left behind a safety deposit box key mailed to my apartment with no return address. Inside were records of Vivian's embezzlement, contact information for Rebecca Moore, and Jennifer Walsh's institutionalization paperwork, and one final gift. A DNA test showing a 50% probability that the baby she was carrying was not Marcus's at all. The Ashford family panic was beautiful to watch. Marcus discovered his guaranteed heir had vanished with a fortune he had not known she could touch. The wedding that was supposed to save his inheritance had evaporated. The woman who was supposed to give him a son might have been carrying someone else's child entirely. Vivian went into damage control mode, but there was nothing to control. Their perfect plan had collapsed, and they did not even know who to blame. I watched the news coverage from my apartment, Hope's stuffed elephant on my lap. Marcus at a press conference, sweating through his expensive suit, claiming he and Destiny had decided to take time apart, denying everything while obviously lying. Ellie sat beside me, shaking her head. How the turntables, she said. I think the expression is how the tables have turned, I corrected. She smiled. I know what I said. For the first time in months, I smiled too. But I was not naive enough to think the fight was over. The Ashfords had lost a battle, but they still had resources, still had connections, still had my daughter. The war was just beginning. 2 weeks before the final custody hearing, I received a phone call that changed everything. Daniel Ashford, Marcus's younger brother, the black sheep who had been cut out of the family years ago for reasons no one ever fully explained. I heard what Marcus did to you, Daniel said, his voice carrying a bitterness I recognized. What my mother did. I want to help. I was cautious, of course. The Ashfords had taught me to be cautious, but Daniel had his own history with the family, his own grievances, his own reasons to want them exposed. We met in secret at a diner outside the city where no one would recognize us. Daniel was younger than Marcus by 3 years, but looked older, worn down by whatever had happened between him and his family. He told me his story over bad coffee and mediocre pie. I was supposed to be the heir, he said, the firstborn, but I made the mistake of questioning our mother, asking where the foundation money was really going, suggesting that maybe the family business was not entirely legitimate. What happened? He smiled bitterly. I was removed, not from the family, not officially, but from everything that mattered. The trust, the business, the inheritance. Marcus became the golden child, and I became the cautionary tale. The brother no one talks about, and now you want revenge. I want justice. There is a difference. He leaned forward. I know things about the family trust, the foundation, the bodies they have buried over the years, things that could help you. Over the following week, Daniel provided information that my team verified. Trust structures and their vulnerabilities, former employees who had been wronged and might be willing to testify, details about the foundation's finances that supported what Susan had already found. Everything checked out. For the first time, I had an ally inside the enemy camp, someone who knew their secrets, their weaknesses, their patterns of destruction. I began to trust him. That was my mistake. The final custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in October. I arrived at the courthouse with my legal team, my evidence organized, my witnesses prepared. A new judge presided. Patricia Holloway, known for fairness, appointed after the previous judge, recused herself due to media attention about her golf dates with Marcus's father. We presented our case methodically. My stable income, growing business, clean apartment support system, evidence of Marcus's pattern of behavior with previous women, Destiny's fraudulent background, Vivian's embezzlement. I could see the momentum shifting. For the first time, victory felt not just possible, but likely. Then Marcus's lawyers called their surprise witness. Daniel Ashford walked to the witness stand, and my heart stopped. He did not look at me as he was sworn in. He did not look at me as Marcus's attorney began asking questions. He stared straight ahead, his face blank, while he systematically destroyed everything I had built. Mrs. Bennett contacted me several months ago, Daniel testified. She claimed to want information about my family, but what she really wanted was revenge. He described our meetings, our conversations, our plans, but he twisted everything, made it sound like I was obsessed, dangerous, delusional. She talked about burning them down, Daniel said, about making them suffer. She said she would not rest until every Ashford was destroyed. I had said those things in moments of anger, in moments of despair, but not the way he was presenting them, not without context. And then he produced the evidence. Screenshots of text messages I had actually sent him, but edited, cropped, taken completely out of context to make me sound unhinged. The judge ordered a recess to investigate the new evidence. Outside the courtroom, I confronted Daniel. "I trusted you," I hissed, struggling to keep my voice down in the crowded hallway. "I trusted you and you betrayed me." He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there was not triumph. It was something worse. It was nothing at all. "You should not have. I thought you hated them. I thought you wanted them exposed. I do hate them." His voice was flat, emotionless. "But they offered me back in. The trust, the inheritance, everything I lost. All I had to do was help them destroy you." He straightened his tie, preparing to return to the courtroom. "And honestly, you were never going to win anyway. This way, at least I get something out of it." He walked away, and I watched him go, feeling something crack inside my chest. I had armed my enemy with my own words. That night, the cascade began. First, my business partner Rachel called. She was leaving Bennett Events. "Vivian Ashford offered me my own company," Rachel said, her voice apologetic but firm. "Full funding, full ownership. All I have to do is walk away from you. I am sorry, Carrie. I have kids. I cannot afford to be on the wrong side of this fight." Click. Then my lawyer called with worse news. "They are not just fighting for custody anymore," Maggie said, her voice tight. "They have filed an emergency motion to terminate your parental rights entirely. They are claiming you are a danger to Hope, that you are mentally unstable, that you tried to hire your ex-husband's own brother to destroy the family. 3 catastrophes in one night: Daniel's betrayal, Rachel's departure, the threat of losing Hope forever." I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the ruins of everything I had fought for, and reached for my phone. I was going to call Raymond Cross, tell him I was done, that I could not fight anymore, that the Ashfords had won. The phone rang before I could dial. "Ms. Bennett," Raymond Cross said, "before you make any decisions you will regret. There is something I need to tell you." I listened. "Your grandfather's inheritance has one final condition," Cross continued, "one he never told anyone about until the moment it was needed. What condition? That you reach a point where giving up seems like the only rational choice, and you choose not to give up anyway. Silence. He wanted to see if I would break, I whispered. No. He wanted to see if you would choose not to break. There is a crucial difference. Breaking is what happens to you. It is passive, external, imposed. Choosing not to break is what you do. It is active, internal, decided. Cross paused. Your grandfather believed that true strength is not about never falling. It is about deciding to stand up one more time, then you fall down. The Trust Observer has documented everything you have been through, everything you have overcome, and his assessment is that you are ready. Ready for what? For the final phase. $79.5 million. All of it. I sat in the darkness, listening to those numbers, trying to understand what they meant. The question is, Cross said, are you ready? I thought about Hope, about the way she had reached for me when they took her away, about the promise I had made the day she was born. I thought about Jennifer Walsh, still locked in a psychiatric facility after 8 years because she had dared to fight. I thought about Rebecca Moore, forced to abandon her child and her identity to escape the Ashford machine. I thought about every woman the Ashfords had destroyed, every life they had ruined, every future they had stolen, and I realized that I was not just fighting for my daughter anymore. I was fighting for all of them. Release the funds, I told Cross. All of them. What are you going to do? I am going to end them. $82 million. That was what I had when the dust settled. The full inheritance from my grandfather, plus everything I had earned through Bennett events. More money than the Ashfords expected. More than they could have imagined. And I did not use a single penny of it on revenge. I used it for strategy. Over 30 days, quietly and systematically, I acquired controlling stakes in 5 companies that supplied the Ashford business empire, the catering company that handled all their events, the florist that decorated their homes, the PR firm that managed their public image, the media company that published their glowing profiles in the society pages. I purchased the debt on the Ashford Foundation building. If they missed a single payment, I could call the loan and take the property. I invested in competitors, strengthening businesses that had struggled against Ashford market dominance. I hired employees the Ashfords had wronged, people who knew where the bodies were buried and were ready to start digging. Everything happened at once, but invisibly. Shell companies and holding structures that Frank Donovan helped me create. Legal maneuvers that kept my name off the paperwork until I was ready to reveal it. The Ashfords had no idea what was coming. Their suppliers started becoming unavailable. Events that used to run smoothly began experiencing mysterious complications. Media coverage shifted from glowing profiles to probing questions. Building inspectors showed up at the foundation with routine inquiries. Former employees started giving interviews to journalists who had been waiting for years for someone to go on record. The panic set in gradually. Something is happening, Vivian said at an emergency family meeting that Frank had bugged. Someone is coordinating all of this. Someone with resources. Marcus checked the corporate filings, traced the shell companies, followed the money as far as he could. It is called Bennett Holdings, he said, his face pale. It is Carolina. It has to be Carolina. That is impossible, Vivian snapped. She has nothing. We made sure of it. We were wrong. They tried to reach me. Marcus called dozens of times. I never answered. Vivian tried to activate her society connections, but suddenly everyone was busy. Daniel, the traitor, tried to switch sides again, offering to recant his testimony. My lawyer sent him a cease and desist. You made your choice, Maggie wrote. Now live with it. Even Vivian's personal assistant of 15 years resigned. I received a better offer, she announced, from Bennett Holdings. Also, you are a terrible person, and I hope you lose everything." She handed Vivian her resignation letter and walked out without looking back. The final custody hearing was rescheduled for December. This time I was ready. The courtroom was packed. Media filled the gallery, alerted by strategic leaks from my PR team. The Ashfords arrived looking diminished, worried, off balance for the first time in their privileged lives. Judge Patricia Holloway presided, a woman with a reputation for fairness and a complete immunity to social pressure. Maggie Shaw presented our case with surgical precision. First, she introduced evidence of Destiny Blake's true identity. Diana Brooks, professional con artist, wanted in 2 states for fraud. The fact that Marcus had chosen her as his future wife proved his judgment was catastrophically compromised. Then she called Rebecca Moore. Rebecca testified via video link from Montana, her face older than her years, her voice shaking but determined. She described her relationship with Marcus, her pregnancy, the threats and intimidation, the $500,000 payoff she had accepted because she was too scared to fight. "They told me I would end up like Jennifer if I did not cooperate," Rebecca said. "They told me no one would ever believe me. But I kept records. I kept everything." The documents she had saved for 5 years were entered into evidence. Then Maggie presented Jennifer Walsh's case. Medical records obtained through subpoena showed that Jennifer had been committed on the recommendation of a psychiatrist who received $50,000 from the Ashford Foundation the same month he signed her commitment papers. The diagnosis that had kept her locked up for 8 years was fraudulent. Jennifer Walsh was not mentally ill, Maggie told the court. She was a victim of a systematic campaign to destroy any woman who challenged the Ashford family. Susan Wells took the stand to present the forensic accounting evidence. $500,000 embezzled from the Ashford Foundation over 10 years. Tax fraud, wire fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty. Then came Daniel's destruction. Maggie presented evidence of his financial arrangement with the family, the payments he had received in exchange for his testimony, the text messages where he had discussed with Vivian exactly what lies to tell. Daniel Ashford was not a witness, Maggie argued. He was a hired actor paid by the defendants to commit perjury. His testimony was stricken from the record. Marcus took the stand in his own defense. It was a disaster. "Mr. Ashford?" Maggie asked, her voice calm and relentless. "How many women have you impregnated and then discarded?" "That is not," he stammered. "I do not know what you are talking about. Rebecca Moore? Jennifer Walsh? Carolina Bennett, 3 women that we know of. Is the number higher?" He looked at his mother, desperate for rescue. She stared straight ahead, her face white, offering nothing. "There might have been," Marcus admitted. "I do not remember." The courtroom erupted. When it was my turn to testify, I told my story. Every humiliation, every betrayal, every sleepless night. Not with anger or bitterness, but with the calm clarity of someone who had survived the fire and emerged stronger. "I did not fight for custody to get revenge," I said. "I fought because my daughter deserves a mother who shows her that when the world knocks you down, you get back up. Every single time. I want Hope to know that her value does not depend on anyone else's opinion. That being thrown away by people who should have loved her does not mean she is worthless. That she is enough, exactly as she is." Judge Holloway delivered her verdict. Full custody to Carolina Bennett, effective immediately. Marcus Ashford shall have supervised visitation only, contingent upon completion of parenting classes and psychological evaluation. Vivian Ashford is referred to the district attorney for investigation of fraud. The judge removed her glasses and looked directly at Marcus and Vivian. "In 23 years on the bench," she said, "I have rarely seen such a systematic attempt to destroy a woman for the crime of becoming pregnant. The behavior of the Ashford family represents everything wrong with how our society treats mothers. Ms. Bennett, I commend your strength. After the verdict, a social worker brought hope into the courtroom. My daughter was 18 months old now, walking on unsteady legs, her dark eyes searching the room until they found me. "Mama!" she cried. "Mama!" I dropped to my knees, arms open. Hope ran to me, stumbling, laughing, crying. I held her for the first time in 6 months. "Mama is here," I whispered into her hair. "Mama is here, and she is never letting go again." 2 years had passed since that day in the courtroom. I sat on the porch of our home, watching Hope play in the backyard. Not a mansion, not an estate, just a comfortable house in a good neighborhood, with a swing set and a garden and neighbors who waved when they drove past. Hope was 3.5 now, all dark curls and stubborn chin, and a personality that reminded me of my grandfather's photograph. She had his determination, his refusal to accept anything less than what she wanted. She had my smile. Bennett Holdings was worth $300 million. Not through exploitation or manipulation, but through ethical business practices that proved you could succeed without destroying people. I had become a case study in business schools, an example of how to build an empire on principles instead of cruelty. The Ashfords had faced their reckoning. Vivian was convicted of embezzlement, tax fraud, and wire fraud. She received a 5-year sentence, of which she would serve 3. Her mugshot went viral. Former friends who had kissed her ring for decades suddenly could not remember her name. Marcus lost control of the family trust when the scandal clause was triggered. He worked as a middle manager at a financial services company now, his golden boy status stripped away, his name a punchline instead of a power. He had supervised visits with Hope, which he used about half the time. Daniel got exactly what the family had promised him: the trust, the inheritance, the restoration of his position, but the trust was worth 60% less after legal fees and settlements. And everyone knew he was the man who had betrayed someone for money. His reputation was garbage. Last I heard, he spent his evenings drinking alone at a country club, complaining to anyone who would listen about how unfair life had become. I had bought the women's shelter and renamed it the Hope Foundation. Ellie ran it with full funding. Every woman who needed help received help. No questions, no conditions. No one turned away. In 2 years, 400 women had rebuilt their lives because of what we created together. Rebecca Moore received a settlement from the Ashford estate. She used it to start a nonprofit for mothers in crisis, helping women who faced what she had faced find the resources to fight back. Jennifer Walsh was finally released from the institution that had held her for 8 years. She was suing the Ashfords now, with my legal team working pro bono. The psychiatrist who had committed her had lost his license. Ellie visited often, bringing groceries out of habit even though my kitchen was always full. We would sit on the porch and watch Hope play. 2 women who had survived their own particular disasters, finding peace in the wreckage. "You know what I love most about all this?" Ellie said one afternoon. "It is not that you got rich. It is that you used it. Every woman who walks through those shelter doors knows that someone who is exactly where they are built this place. That is not revenge. That is legacy." One evening, I was tucking Hope into bed when she asked the question I had been preparing for. "Mama, Emma has a daddy. Why do I not see my daddy more?" I set down the storybook and thought carefully. "Your daddy made some choices that mean he cannot be with us the way other daddies are with their families. It is not your fault, baby. It is never your fault. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and other people pay the price." Hope thought about this, her face serious in that way only small children can manage. "Do you make mistakes?" "All the time," I admitted. But I try to learn from them, and I promise, no matter what mistakes I make, I will always love you and be here for you. She wrapped her arms around my neck. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby, more than everything. Later that night, I sat in my home office, reviewing reports from the Hope Foundation. 400 women helped, 400 lives changed, 400 futures rewritten because I had refused to stay broken. On my desk sat a framed photograph of my grandfather, Benjamin Cole. I had learned so much about him over the past 2 years, a man who had built everything from nothing and wanted his granddaughter to do the same. I hope I made you proud, I told him. Next to his photograph sat one of Hope, laughing on her swing set, and a news clipping about Vivian's conviction, framed not as a trophy, but as a reminder that cruelty always found its way home. Someone asked me once what I would tell women who were going through what I had experienced, women who had been thrown away, who had lost everything, who could not see any path forward. I told them this: you are not what happened to you. You are not the lies people tell about you. You are not the worst day of your life. You are what you choose to do next. Every morning, you get to decide who you are going to be. Not who your ex-husband says you are, not who his family says you are, not who the world says you are. You decide. It will not be easy. Some days you will want to quit. Some days you will cry so hard you cannot breathe. Some days you will wonder if any of it is worth the fight, but then you will look at your children, or your friends, or yourself in the mirror, and you will find one more ounce of strength, one more reason to stand up, one more day to keep going. And one day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but one day, you will look back at the person who threw you away, and you will realize they did not destroy you. They freed you. They freed you to become someone you never knew you could be, someone they never saw coming, someone unstoppable. 6 months after the trial ended, a package arrived at my door. International postmark, Costa Rica. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The letter was from Destiny Blake. Hey, Carolina, you probably thought you would never hear from me again. You would be right. This is the last time. But I thought you should know something. That baby I was carrying? Definitely not Marcus's. DNA confirmed it. The father is someone much more interesting. His name is David Ashford, Vivian's husband, the beloved patriarch who supposedly died of a heart attack 4 years ago. He did not die. He faked his death to escape Vivian. He has been hiding in Costa Rica ever since, living off accounts she never knew existed. We met at a resort. One thing led to another. You know how it is. Turns out the Ashford men all have the same weaknesses, and they all underestimate the women around them. I am keeping the baby. She is beautiful. I named her Justice. Vivian is going to find out eventually that her husband is alive and has been hiding from her for years, that her granddaughter exists, but she will never be allowed near her, that the family legacy she destroyed people to protect was already destroyed by her own husband's escape. I thought about telling her myself, but honestly, watching her find out naturally is going to be so much more fun. You burned their house down from the outside. I burned it from the inside. Between the two of us, nothing is left. Enjoy your freedom, Carolina. You earned it. See you never. D. P.S. Hope is a beautiful name for a daughter. So is Justice. I think they would get along. The photograph showed Destiny, healthy and smiling, holding a baby girl. Standing next to her was an older man I recognized from old photographs at the Ashford estate, David Ashford, very much alive. I stared at that photograph for a long moment. Then I started laughing, really laughing, the kind that comes from deep in your belly, the kind that makes your eyes water and your sides ache. I picked up my phone and called Ellie. Are you sitting down? You are not going to believe this. Some stories end with revenge. Some end with justice. Mine ended with freedom. Freedom I fought for, freedom I earned, freedom I would spend the rest of my life protecting. The Ashfords thought they were untouchable. They thought their money made them safe. They thought they could throw people away without consequences. They were wrong. And somewhere in Costa Rica, the next chapter of their destruction was already being written by a con artist with a baby named Justice. But that was not my story anymore. My story was about hope. The little girl sleeping down the hall who would never know what it felt like to be thrown away. Who would grow up surrounded by love and security and the absolute certainty that she was enough. Exactly as she was. That was the only ending that ever mattered. For every woman who was told she was not enough, you are. You always were. Now, beautiful family, I have a small request before we continue. If you believe that women deserve to be treated with dignity, hit that subscribe button right now. If you have ever been underestimated and proved them wrong, drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, someone going through hard times, someone who feels alone, share this video with them. It might be exactly what they need. We are building something special here, a community of strong, resilient people who lift each other up. And I am so grateful you are part of it. Now, let us meet Carolina Bennett, the woman who turned her darkest night into her greatest victory. Closing statement. Thank you for staying until the end, beautiful family. Before you go, I want you to remember one thing from Carolina's story. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to do next. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe if you have not already. Your support means the world to me and helps us create more stories like this one. And please share this with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose life you might change. Final disclaimer. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually crafted by our team to deliver meaningful stories with powerful life lessons. Every word was written with purpose, to entertain, to inspire, and to remind you that no matter how dark your story gets, you have the power to write a better ending. Thank you for being part of this beautiful family. I will see you in the next story.